Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we descend into 10 accounts where winter's embrace became something far more sinister than cold. These are not campfire tales or folklore passed down through generations. These are confessions from people who discovered that when the temperature drops and darkness falls early, the things that hunt us grow bolder. From frozen lakes hiding impossible secrets to snowstorms that trap families with the very evil they were trying to escape. Each story tonight will remind you why our ancestors feared the long winter nights. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of winter's grip, where the snow muffles your screams and nobody can hear you beg for help. The cabin was the kind of place people post online with captions about getting away from it all, tucked deep into the mountains, wrapped in pines heavy with snow, and far enough from the nearest town that my phone lost service a full 30 minutes before we arrived. My wife called it perfect. My son called it awesome. I called it exactly what we needed after the year we had just survived. The listing had promised a quiet New Year week in the woods, a hot tub under the stars, and a chance to reset. It did not mention that the cabin was already watching us when we pulled into the driveway. I remember the crunch of the tires on frozen gravel and the way our breath fogged in the air as we climbed out. The cold hit like a wall, the thin mountain kind that cuts straight through your clothes. My son grabbed his backpack and started talking about building a snow fort before we even unlocked the door. My wife was already filming a little video for her followers, turning in a slow circle to show the snowdrifts, the towering trees, and the small, dark cabin with smoke already curling from the chimney. The property manager had turned the heat on for us. At the time, that felt thoughtful. Later, it felt like something else. Inside, the cabin was warm and almost too cozy. Soft yellow light from lamps, a stone fireplace stacked with fresh wood, and that faint smell of old timber and cleaner, the kind of place that made you want to sink into the couch and forget there was a world outside. My son ran straight for the loft area that overlooked the living room, calling dibs on the bed up there. My wife found the kitchen and started opening cabinets, pleased to see everything labeled and neatly arranged. I walked through with the slightly suspicious eye of a contractor, noting how recently some of the fixtures had been updated, how new the smoke detectors looked, how many of them there were for such a small space. At first, I told myself it was just professional habit. When you spend your life inside other people's houses, you notice things they do not. The corners of ceilings, the way wires run along baseboards, the tiny circles in the walls where holes have been patched. I saw a few of those in the hallway, low to the ground, each the size of a dime, perfectly round. Too perfect, really. Someone had sanded them smooth and painted over them with care, but the paint was a slightly different sheen. I ran my hand along one and felt the faint dip of it under my fingers. It meant nothing to me then. We settled in easily. My wife put on music low enough to feel like background noise. My son dumped his bag of toys out on the rug and immediately started setting up some elaborate battle between superheroes. I opened the fridge and saw it had been stocked with basics we had requested. Milk, eggs, bread, a few local beers, even a pie from some nearby bakery the listing had recommended. There was a handwritten note on the counter welcoming us by name, signed simply with an initial. It made me think someone cared. Now, I wonder how long they stood in this room alone, practicing our names out loud. The first night passed without anything I would have called strange. We played board games, argued about whether to start a movie too late, and listened to the wind scrape against the windows. Out here, away from traffic and neighbors and city sounds, every small noise feels amplified. The settling of the cabin, the creak of stairs expanding and contracting with temperature, the distant snap of branches under the weight of snow. My wife went to bed early, exhausted from the drive. My son fell asleep on the couch midway through a movie. his face lit by the flickering light of the screen. I carried him up to the loft, tucked him in, and turned off everything but the lamp near the stairs. That was when I noticed the first camera. It was not obvious at first glance, just a small black dome on the ceiling near the smoke detector above the living room, no bigger than a golf ball. I had walked under it 3 times without really registering it. But as I turned off the television and looked up, the way it caught the light from the lamp made my stomach tighten. It had no blinking light, no visible brand name, just a glossy eye staring down at the room. We had not seen any mention of security cameras inside the cabin on the listing. Outside, sure. People like to feel protected. Inside was different. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was some kind of motion sensor. Maybe it did not work anymore, and nobody had bothered to take it down. I went into the kitchen and looked up. There was another one above the entrance, tucked into the corner between the cabinets and the ceiling. In the hallway, I found a third, positioned to cover both bedroom doors and the bathroom. That was when the cozy feeling of the place started peeling away. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking from one black dome to another, and wondered how many times they had watched other families stand in that exact spot. I could have gone upstairs, shaken my wife awake, and told her everything right then. Instead, I did what too many people do when something feels wrong. I tried to make it small. I told myself there was probably some explanation. Maybe the cameras were not connected to anything anymore. Maybe they only monitored for break-ins. Maybe I was being paranoid after a year of long hours and too many nights checking the locks twice. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow from the fireplace, and went to bed with a dull ache behind my eyes. The next morning, the world outside had disappeared behind a wall of falling snow. Thick flakes drifted down in slow, endless sheets, piling up on the deck and burying the tire tracks in the driveway. The weather app on my phone, which had somehow clung to one final bar of reception overnight before giving up completely, showed a storm warning for the entire region. My wife called it magical. My son pressed his face to the glass like he had never seen snow before. I looked at the road and understood that if anything went wrong, help would not be coming quickly. It was during breakfast that my son mentioned the camera. He was spooning cereal into his mouth and swinging his feet under the chair when he looked up at the hallway and said completely casually that he did not like the blinking red light. My wife and I both froze. I asked him what he meant. He pointed toward the ceiling just outside our bedroom door, where one of those black domes sat. Only now, there was a tiny red dot glowing just beneath the dark plastic. I walked over slowly, every hair on my arms rising. The dot was faint, but it was there, steady and unblinking. Overnight, something had turned on. My wife tried to tell me it might be part of the alarm system, a default setting or something. I climbed onto a chair and leaned close enough to see my own distorted reflection in the dome. There, barely visible behind the tinted cover, was the unmistakable shape of a lens. I reached up and ran my thumb along the edge until I found a seam, then twisted. The dome came off in my hand, attached by a short cable. There was a camera inside, small but high quality, with a tiny card slot and a manufacturer's logo. This was no cheap sensor. Someone had paid for good equipment. Someone had installed it with care. My wife's face changed as she watched me turn the device over in my hand. I could see the moment she went from annoyed to frightened. She asked me to check the others. In the living room, I found the same model. In the kitchen, another. In the loft above my son's bed, one more, positioned directly over where his pillow lay. That was the one that made my vision go sharp at the edges. I climbed onto the railing, took it down, and stared at it until my hands started to shake. We argued in low, tight voices while our son played obliviously with his toys. My wife wanted to assume the best, to believe that the cameras were there for some neutral reason, that the footage was never watched, that maybe it was all automated. I could not stop picturing someone sitting in a room full of monitors, watching us unpack, undress, sleep, listening to our conversations, watching our son. When you work in construction, you learn things about how people run wires, where they hide hardware, how they make things look seamless. I started looking for the brain of the system, a router, a recorder, anything. Behind the television console, I found a black box tucked into the shadows. Its lights dark, but its cables running upward into the wall. It had a keyhole on the front and a label with a brand I recognized from commercial surveillance setups. This was not something people installed for fun. This was how you watched every inch of a building at once. I unplugged it. For a second, nothing happened. Then my son shouted from the loft, saying the lights had gone off up there. My wife checked her phone and said the Wi-Fi network name had vanished. I stood there, holding the cable, feeling like I had cut a nerve in some living thing. The cabin suddenly felt less like a getaway and more like a body, with wires for veins and cameras for eyes. We decided to call the number on the welcome note, to demand an explanation, to say we were leaving as soon as the road cleared enough that we would not die in a ditch trying to escape. There was no signal. The call would not go through. The cabin's landline, which sat on the kitchen counter like a prop, produced only a faint hiss when I picked it up. The snow outside had grown heavier, the sky a solid sheet of white. Our world had shrunk to the walls of that cabin, and the trees pressing in on all sides. My wife suggested we wait it out, keep the cameras down, and deal with it when we got back to town. My son, sensing the tension he did not fully understand, grew quiet and clung closer to us than usual. It was sometime that afternoon that we heard the knock. 3 heavy blows on the front door, slow and deliberate. Not the quick, sharp rhythm of a delivery or a neighbor. The sound rattled the glass in the window panes. My son jumped. My wife and I looked at each other, both of us thinking the same thing without saying it. Nobody else was supposed to be here. The driveway was buried. Our car was the only one. There had been no sound of an engine, no crunch of tires. Just those 3 deliberate knocks, and then silence. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. For a long moment, I saw nothing but swirling snow. Then a shape moved forward, resolving into the figure of a man standing on the porch without a coat, wearing only a flannel shirt, jeans, and boots dusted with powder. His hair was wet from the snow, his face pale and expressionless. He looked up directly into the peephole, as if he could see my eye behind it. His lips did not move, but I could see the faint fog of his breath in the cold. Every instinct I had screamed not to open that door. I called out through the wood, asking what he wanted. He waited a beat before answering, his voice muffled but clear. He said he was the owner. He said his system had sent him an alert that all the cameras had gone offline at once, as if that justified why he was standing on our porch in a storm, with no visible car, no jacket, and no sign of being winded from a hike through deep snow. He asked if everything was all right inside. The way he said inside made my skin crawl. My wife stood in the hallway behind me, holding our son's hand. She whispered for me to tell him to leave, to say we were fine, to mention the police if we had to. I told the man through the door that we had found the cameras, that we did not consent to being recorded, and that we would be contacting the booking platform as soon as we had service. I said we did not need anything from him and that he should go. He was silent for a long moment. Then he chuckled, a low sound that did not match the blankness I had seen in his face. He said he understood our concerns. He said he had only ever used the footage when there were issues with guests. He said the cameras were mainly there to keep people honest about how many were staying and what they were doing. The way he said honest made my stomach twist. I told him again to leave. That was when he asked how my son was enjoying the loft. The words felt like ice water poured down my spine. I'd never mentioned that we had a child with us. I'd never mentioned the loft. He said my son's name next, and this time there was something like affection in his tone. He said our boy looked just like me when he slept. My wife squeezed our son's shoulder so hard he winced. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. People talk about fight or flight like it is a simple choice. In that moment, there was a third option: freeze. For a few seconds, I stood there, unable to move, caught between the urge to rip the door open and try to hurt this man, and the urge to drag my family into the bathroom and wedge ourselves into the tub like it would protect us. The cabin seemed to listen with us, every creak and sigh amplified. Eventually, I found my voice again and told him that if he did not leave, I would break the glass and use the shards on him the second he crossed the threshold. I meant it. I was terrified, but beneath the fear was something sharper. The idea of this stranger watching my family sleep had awoken a part of me that did not care about consequences. I heard him exhale, amused rather than threatened. Then he said something that still keeps me awake. He said this was not the first time guests had tried to take down his cameras. He said they always put them back up eventually. The quiet after his words felt heavier than the storm outside. I listened for footsteps in the snow, for the sound of someone moving away, but there was nothing. When I looked through the peephole again, the porch was empty. No man, no footprints, just wind-pushing drifts against the door. For a moment, I thought I had imagined him, that the stress and isolation had finally cracked something in my mind. But when I opened the door a fraction, cold air rushed in and caught on something hanging from the handle. It was a small black plastic dome, identical to the ones I had taken from the ceiling. Inside, just visible through the tint, a red light glowed steady and unblinking. The first time I heard the screams, I told myself it was just the television. The walls in our little cul-de-sac carried sound in strange ways during winter, when the snow piled up against the houses and turned the street into a muffled tunnel. It was early December, a week after Ashton moved in next door, and the neighborhood group chat had already decided he was a blessing. Single man, mid-30s, friendly enough, always waved, always shoveled, not just his own driveway, but the sidewalk in front of Mrs. Keating's place across the street. People like that put the others at ease. They made you feel like nothing truly bad could happen on a street where someone volunteered to bring your trash bins in when it was below freezing. I remember standing at my kitchen sink that night, rinsing out a mug while the window over the counter fogged around the edges from the steam. The snow outside reflected the dim glow of the streetlights, turning everything a soft bluish white. The scream cut through that softness like a blade. It was high and raw, the sound of someone whose throat had already been pushed too far. For a second, the mug slipped in my soapy hands. I froze, listening, my heart pounding in my ears. Then another sound followed, deeper and jagged, something between a shout and a sob, then nothing. My rational brain rushed in to fill the silence. It is a movie. It is a video game. It is drunk friends being stupid. People make horror sounds for fun in this season. They scare each other. They record videos. I clung to those explanations like they were life preservers. The alternative meant admitting that someone on my quiet, tree-lined street might actually be in danger. I dried my hands, turned up the volume on the podcast playing from my phone, and tried not to look at the dark window where the reflection of my own face stared back, wide-eyed and pale. The next morning, the world looked clean again. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, smoothing out the tire tracks and footprints, making our little cul-de-sac look like a postcard. When I stepped outside to scrape ice from my windshield before my shift, I saw Ashton already out there with his shovel, breath clouding the air as he worked. He raised a hand in greeting, his smile easy, his cheeks red from the cold. I told myself that someone who shoveled that carefully could not possibly be the source of what I had heard. "You on nights again?" "Scar," he called across the narrow strip of lawn between our driveways. I nodded. Being a nurse meant he was not the first neighbor to know my schedule. He had introduced himself the week he moved in with a plate of store-bought cookies and a comment about feeling safer with a medical professional next door. People thought that way about us, as if we were emergency equipment installed on their block. Break glass in case of disaster. I smiled back and made some joke about caffeine being my real lifeline. His laugh carried easily in the cold air. For a moment, the previous night's sound felt like something I had dreamed. The second time it happened, there was no pretending. It was 4 days later, close to midnight. I had just come home from a brutal shift in the emergency department. The kind of 12 hours that leaves blood under your nails and other people's grief stuck in your lungs. I wanted nothing more than to shower until my skin felt new. I had just stepped out of my scrubs when I heard it. Not a single scream this time, but a series of muffled cries rising and falling, like someone was trying to shout with a hand over their mouth. There was a thump against what I knew had to be a wall. A man's voice, low and angry, too muffled for words, then another impact. I stood in my bedroom, in nothing but a towel, heart racing, every nerve suddenly painfully awake. The sound was coming from the shared wall between my house and Ashton's. Our units were technically detached, but the gap was so small that it might as well not have been there. I could hear his television sometimes, the bass from his music if he played it too loud. I knew the layout of his place from the realtor's listing. The room on the other side of my bedroom wall was his basement stairwell. I moved closer, pressing my ear to the cool dry wall. For a moment, all I heard was my own breathing, too loud, too fast. Then there it was again. A sob, choked off. A thud. The scrape of something heavy being dragged. I did what I have told countless family members in the hospital to do in an emergency. I reached for my phone. Calling the police should have been simple. I should have dialed, given my address, told them I believed I was hearing violence in progress. But as my fingers hovered over the screen, 1,000 second thoughts fought for space in my mind. What if I was wrong? What if it was the television? What if it was consensual? What if the police showed up and found nothing, and I became the hysterical neighbor who cried wolf? I thought about my job, about how quickly rumors spread in small communities. I thought about Ashton's friendly wave in the morning and the way Mrs. Keating smiled whenever he shoveled in front of her house. The noise stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy and thick, like the air just before a storm breaks. I stood there holding my phone, my towel dripping water onto the carpet, and did nothing. The next week, the neighborhood group chat lit up with excitement. Ashton was having people over. He had sent out an open invitation to a small holiday get-together, just a few neighbors, some drinks, some snacks. He said he wanted to get to know everyone better before the new year. My first reaction was a hard, sick twist in my stomach. My second was an image of myself walking into the emergency department after ignoring screams and finding a familiar face on a stretcher. I typed out a quick excuse about working nights and set my phone face down on the table. 2 days later, I found out the party happened anyway. I saw the photos on social media when my shift ended. Ashton with his arm around the single school teacher from down the street. Ashton laughing with the retired couple from the corner. Ashton in front of his house, lights twinkling behind him. The caption, full of gratitude for such a warm and welcoming street. I studied every image, searching for something wrong in his eyes. A shadow at the edges of his smile. There was nothing. Just a handsome man in a nice sweater, looking like he belonged. The missing poster went up the week before Christmas. I saw it at the grocery store first, taped to the community bulletin board near the entrance. A young woman's face, late 20s, brown hair, nervous smile. Underneath, bold letters asked for information about her disappearance. Last seen in our town 2 weeks prior. Last known contact was a text to a friend saying she would be home late, that she had met someone. I read the flyer 3 times before I let myself look at the rest of the page. There, at the bottom, was a grainy still from a security camera at a bar downtown. The missing woman, standing near the entrance, coat over her arm. Beside her, turned slightly away from the camera, was a man I recognized from 20 feet and a fogged kitchen window. I drove home on autopilot, the world outside my windshield blurred by falling snow and the pulse in my temples. When I pulled into my driveway, Ashton's house was dark. No car in the drive, no lights on. The absence itself felt ominous. I sat there in my car with the engine running, fingers on the steering wheel, and made a decision I would spend a long time questioning. I turned the car off, walked into my house, shut and locked the door, and called the police. This time, I did not let the second thoughts get in the way. I told the dispatcher about the screams. I told her about the thuds, the dragging sound, the missing woman on the poster, the image from the bar. I gave her Ashton's address. My voice shook more than I wanted it to, but I got the words out. She told me to stay inside, to lock my doors, that officers would be there shortly. When the line went dead, the house felt too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the heating vents, the faint, settling creaks of wood contracting in the cold. From my front window, I watched the street while pretending to straighten a curtain. The first patrol car rolled in slowly, tires crunching on packed snow, lights off. It stopped a few houses down while the officers talked, then moved closer. By the time a second car appeared, Mrs. Keating's blinds across the street had already twitched 3 separate times. My phone buzzed once with a new message in the neighborhood chat. "Anyone know what is going on outside?" I did not answer. The officers knocked on Ashton's door for a long time. When nobody answered, they circled the house, their flashlights cutting through the early darkness. One disappeared toward the back. A minute later, his voice echoed faintly through the cold air, calling for his partner. Something in the way he said it made the hair on my arm stand up. The partner jogged around the side of the house. Both lights vanished. The street felt strangely exposed without their beams. They came back to the front door 5 minutes later, but they did not knock this time. One of them spoke quietly into his radio. The other stepped away from the house completely and looked up and down the street, his gaze snagging on my window just long enough for me to step back. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew that posture. It was the way staff in the emergency department straightened just before a patient coded. The moment when everyone silently acknowledged that whatever could be done casually was over. I was still standing in the hallway when they broke the door. The sound of the battering ram hitting the frame thundered through the winter air, making my windows tremble. Mrs. Keating's blinds shot up completely now, her face a pale oval in the glass. Another neighbor opened their front door halfway, then shut it again when one of the officers waved them back. Something shifted in the neighborhood group chat, a different kind of buzzing, but I ignored it. My entire world had narrowed to that open doorway and the black space beyond it. Time stretched. The officers disappeared inside. More cars arrived, this time with lights flashing softly, turning the snow on the street into an eerie wash of red and blue. An unmarked vehicle slid in behind them. The scene outside began to look less like a welfare check and more like something worse. When I saw the crime scene tape, bright yellow against the white snow, my knees went weak. I had seen that tape countless times in photographs and on television. I had never expected to see it staked into the snow 10 yards from my own front steps. They led him out an hour later. Ashton emerged between 2 officers, his hands cuffed behind his back, his hair messier than I had ever seen it, his face pale but composed. He was wearing the same coat he had worn while shoveling for Mrs. Keating. It looked wrong against the harsh metal of the cuffs. For a moment, he lifted his head and scanned the street, his gaze passing over window after window until it landed on mine. Our eyes met. His expression did not change. But the recognition there was undeniable. He knew exactly who had called. I stepped back from the glass, my heart pounding so loudly that I could hear it. In the emergency department, I had seen men like him before, sitting on gurneys with dried blood on their hands, stories already forming on their lips. The difference was that those men had never waved at me from a driveway, never laughed with my neighbors, never complimented my garden. I did not know which version was more horrifying. The news filled in the blanks in the days that followed, though not all of them. There were interviews with law enforcement officials, cautious statements about an ongoing investigation, blurred photos of evidence bags being carried out into the snow. Anonymous sources said there had been signs in Ashton's basement that did not belong in any healthy home. Restraints, stains, locks on the outside of doors, a hidden room behind a false wall, barely insulated with a mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. They did not say whether the missing woman had been found there. They did not say whether she had still been alive. In the neighborhood group chat, the tone shifted from disbelief to guilt in record time. People replayed interactions, searching for missed clues. The school teacher posted that he had always seemed like a gentleman. The retired couple remembered how generous he had been with his time. Mrs. Keating wrote that she felt ashamed for thanking him all those mornings he cleared her walk. Between the lines of their messages, I could read the same question that had begun eating at me from the inside. How close had we come? The police took my statement, of course. I told them everything about the screams, the thuds, the dragging sounds. I told them how many nights I had told myself it was the television. They did not say much in response, just nodded and wrote. When they left, one of them paused on my porch, hand on the railing, and looked at me with an expression I did not know how to interpret. "You did the right thing," he said. His breath fogged in the frozen air between us. Behind him, crime scene tapes still fluttered in the wind around Ashton's house, bright against the snow. I nodded, but the words did not settle in my chest the way he must have intended. Doing the right thing had not felt heroic. It had felt late. On my next shift in the emergency department, I walked past an empty bed and imagined a woman lying there instead, eyes sunken, skin bruised, the smell of basement concrete still clinging to her hair. I imagined her, staring at the ceiling while monitors beeped around her, wondering how many nights someone next door had heard her and done nothing. The thought burned like acid. Winter deepened. The snowbanks along the street grew taller and then slowly shrank as the days inched toward spring. The gouges in the doorframe of Ashton's former house were repaired. The for sale sign went up. New people would move in eventually, drawn by the same quiet street and helpful neighbors that had lulled us all into complacency. They would see a cozy home with a finished basement and never know what had soaked into the concrete there. Sometimes, late at night, when the heat kicks on and the old vents groan, a stray noise will float in from next door. A thump or a muffled voice from the repair crew, and my heart will spike in my chest before my brain catches up. I lie awake and listen harder than I have ever listened to anything in my life. The memory of those first screams will never leave me. They live under my skin now, right beside the knowledge that the worst monsters are not always strangers in alleyways. Sometimes they are men who shovel your driveway in winter, who learn your schedule, who joke about how safe they feel living next to a nurse. I used to tell myself that evil had a certain look, a certain sound. Now, when the snow falls and the neighborhood windows glow warm against the dark, I know better. It is not the howling wind that scares me anymore. It is the thought of what might be happening in the houses it passes, just quiet enough that the people next door can pretend they do not hear it. The ice on Red Hollow Lake always looked solid from a distance. A white sheet stretching from shore to shore, smooth as poured concrete and dusted with powdery snow. Every winter for as long as I could remember. My dad had told me the same story about the year he first took me out there in a plastic sled, bundled so tightly into my snowsuit that only my eyes showed. He would slap his glove against the ice and say, "See that arch? 8 inches thick. You could park a truck on this." It was supposed to comfort me. It never really did. When I had a son of my own, I told myself I would skip the family traditions that never made sense. But habits are stubborn things. So there I was, New Year's weekend, standing on the same frozen lake with my boy Riley, 9 years old, and vibrating with excitement beside me. The air was so cold, it made the inside of my nose sting. Our breath hung in the still air, drifting up into a sky the color of old steel. The line of pines along the shore stood dark and silent, their branches heavy with snow. "Dad, look," Riley said, stamping his boot heel to hear the hollow thud beneath us. "It sounds solid." "It is solid," I answered automatically, even as I shifted my weight and felt the thickness of the ice the way you feel the strength of a board underfoot. Years of ice fishing had taught me to trust the numbers. It had been below freezing for 3 straight weeks. The bait shop owner said they had measured 10 inches near the center. Plenty. We dragged the sled loaded with our gear out to the spot my dad had always favored, a little offshore from where most of the other fishermen clustered. The town's annual ice fishing derby was next weekend, so the locals were out in force, dotted across the lake like dark buttons on a white coat. Little shacks and pop-up tents stood here and there, some with thin trails of smoke curling from makeshift chimneys. To Riley, it all looked like adventure. To me, it looked like memory. He knelt beside me while I drilled the first hole, the auger biting into the ice with a vibrating growl. Shavings spun up in a pale spiral coating our boots. When the blade punched through the last inch, there was a sudden lurch, and then the sound changed, becoming wet. A dark circle of water appeared, the unfrozen lake staring back at us. Riley leaned over it, eyes wide. "It is like a portal," he said. "Careful," I warned, grabbing the back of his jacket. "You fall in that, and we are going home in the helicopter." He laughed, assuming I was joking. I did not correct him. Kids deserve a little ignorance while they can still afford it. We set up the lines, slipped the minnows onto hooks, and sat on our overturned bucket and folding stool side by side. At first, it was almost peaceful, the kind of quiet you only get in deep winter, when snow eats the sound and the world feels wrapped in cotton. We watched the flags on the tip-ups, waiting for that sudden jerk that meant a fish had taken the bait. We talked about nothing and everything. His math teacher, my students, plans for the rest of break. I started to relax in a way I had not in months. The first strange thing was small enough to ignore. About an hour in, one of the holes started to steam. I noticed it when I glanced down and saw faint wisps curling up from the dark water, as if the lake were exhaling into the frigid air. I frowned and leaned closer. The water itself did not look any different. Still black, still gently lapping at the edges of the ice. It should have been as cold as the air, maybe colder. But when I held my gloved hand above it, a thin wash of warmth brushed my fingertips, subtle but unmistakable. "Dad." Riley's voice was cautious. "Is it supposed to do that?" "Probably just some kind of temperature thing," I said, which was technically true and also meant nothing. I told him to keep his distance anyway, and we moved a few feet back. The steam faded after a while. I told myself I had imagined it. The human mind can invent a lot when given a dark hole and too much emptiness. The second strange thing was harder to dismiss. We had caught 2 small perch and 1 decent walleye when Riley suddenly went still beside me. He was staring into the main hole, the one closest to us, his brows drawn tight together. The line in his hand twitched, then went slack. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" There was something down there, not a fish. It was looking up at me. Every parental instinct in me wanted to laugh, to diffuse the tension, to say it was his imagination. But there was something in his voice that stopped me. A flattened quality, like the time he had walked into the kitchen at 4 years old and quietly announced that his room smelled like smoke because the lamp had fallen onto his blanket. Kids know when something is not right. They know long before we are ready to admit it. I scooted closer and peered into the hole. The water was so dark it looked almost solid, a bottomless black that swallowed the pale light. For a moment, all I saw was my own warped reflection, the vague outline of my hat and the white sky beyond. Then something moved. It was not the flash of a fish. I've seen that 1,000 times. That quick dart of silver, the flick of a tail. This movement was slow and vertical, rising from deeper down. A pale oval emerged just beneath the surface, indistinct at first, then sharpening into something that looked too much like a face. I jerked back, my breath catching. Riley grabbed my sleeve. "You saw it," he said. It was not a question. I forced myself to look again. The face, or whatever my brain was trying to make into a face, hovered just below the surface. 2 darker pits where eyes might be. a suggestion of a mouth. The water around it seemed to thicken, the edges of the hole warping like heat haze. For a second, I thought I was looking at my own reflection distorted by some trick of light. Then the dark pits shifted, focusing, and I knew with a certainty that made my stomach drop that whatever was down there was looking at us. Something bumped the underside of the ice. It was a dull, resonant thud that vibrated up through my knees and into my spine. The hole rippled. Tiny cracks spiderwebbed outward a few inches, then stopped. Riley made a sound I had only ever heard from him in nightmares, a choked, wordless noise. He scrambled backward on hands and knees, his boots slipping on the packed snow. "Pack it up," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." He did not argue. He grabbed the tackle box and shoved things into it in handfuls, not caring what went where. I yanked the lines up from the holes, not bothering to check the hooks. The face in the water sank back, dissolving into darkness, leaving only gently lapping black. The surface of the lake around us was no longer perfectly still. Here and there, the snow atop the ice shifted, subtle tremors running outward from the holes. Farther out, beyond the cluster of huts and tents, I saw a ripple pass under the surface, like a shadow moving beneath a sheet. Nobody else seemed to notice. People laughed, tended their lines, called to one another over the cold air. I wanted to shout, to tell them to get off the ice, but the words would not come. We loaded the sled, hands clumsy with haste. As we started back toward shore, I felt something following. It was not a sound at first so much as a sensation, a dull percussion transmitted through the soles of my boots with every step, a heartbeat slow and heavy pulsing up from below. Riley felt it too. He kept looking at me with wide eyes, his lips pressed together so tightly they had gone white. The heartbeat grew stronger as we moved, as if whatever was under the ice was pacing us from below. Halfway to shore, one of the older guys from town, Hank, waved from his shack doorway. "Already heading in, Archie?" he called, grinning around the edges of his beard. "Day is young." "Riley's cold," I shouted back, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Storm coming." He glanced up at the sky, shrugged, and went back inside. For a moment, I thought about going over there, about grabbing him by the shoulders and telling him what we had seen, but there is a line between caution and sounding unhinged, and I was not ready to cross it in front of my kid. We kept moving. The first crack came from behind us. It was a sharp gunshot sound, followed by a chorus of startled shouts. I spun around in time to see a section of ice near the center of the lake buckle slightly, a white plate tilting for just a second before settling back. The people nearby stumbled, arms pinwheeling for balance. One of the pop-up tents collapsed as its support shifted. From somewhere beneath that spot, the heartbeat seemed to answer itself with a deeper, hollow boom. We ran. The sled jolted and bounced behind us, gear clattering. Riley slipped once, his foot skidding on a patch of smooth ice where the snow had blown thin, but I grabbed his arm and yanked him upright. Each step felt like it took an eternity and no time at all. The shore never seemed to get closer, until suddenly it did. The dark line of trees looming ahead, the packed snow at the edge of the lake giving way to the rougher churn of the path back to the parking area. We did not stop running until our boots hit dirt. Only then did I risk looking back. The lake lay spread out before us, deceptively peaceful again. The huts and shacks still stood, people still clustered around their holes. From this distance, nothing looked wrong. If anything, it all looked smaller and less threatening. For a moment, I thought my mind had amplified everything, that maybe we had panicked over nothing more than bad ice and a trick of reflection. Then I saw the footprints, trailing behind us. From the last hole we had used all the way to the shore was a second set of tracks. They were fainter than ours, as if made by something lighter or less substantial. But they were there. Each print was elongated with no clear heel, the size slightly wrong for a human foot, too narrow and too long. They overlapped our own in places, weaving between them in others, as if something had matched our pace under the ice, each step shadowing ours. "Dad," Riley whispered, following my gaze, "those are not ours." He was right. Whatever had left those impressions in the thin sheen of snow atop the ice had done so without breaking through, like a weight distributed in a way that did not obey the rules I knew. The footprints ended abruptly at the shoreline, not a single one touching the ground we now stood on. As if whatever made them could not, or would not, leave the lake. We did not talk much on the drive home. Riley stared out his window, his reflection pale in the glass. I kept my eyes on the road, grateful, when the phone found enough signal to ping a text from my wife, asking how the fishing had gone. I typed back that we had left early, that the ice felt off, that we would try again next year. I did not mention the face, or the heat, or the footprints. That night, long after I'd tucked Riley into bed and assured him that nothing from that lake could get into our house, I woke to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was the pipes, or a faucet left slightly open. Then I realized it was coming from his room. I rushed in and found him sitting up, eyes wide in the dim light from the hallway. The carpet beneath his bed was damp, the air cold enough that I could see my breath. His blankets were untouched by water. So were the walls. The wet patch on the floor was a perfect circle, as if someone had poured it straight down from above. "I dreamed it was under my bed," he said, voice shaking, knocking on the floor, asking to come in. I knelt beside him, my own heart hammering. The circle of wetness gleamed faintly, and when I touched it with my fingertips, the water was not cold. It was lake temperature, that strange in-between warmth that does not match the air around it. I wiped my hand on my pajama pants and told him it was just a dream, that sometimes our bodies sweat in our sleep, that pipes can do strange things in winter. He nodded, but his eyes never left the wet circle, which was already seeping outward, thinning at the edges. By morning, it had dried completely, leaving only a faint white ring of salt where the water had evaporated. I told myself it could have been anything: a spill, a leak, a trick of sleep. I told myself that over and over, the way you repeat a prayer you do not entirely believe. We have not gone back to Red Hollow Lake since that day. The derby happened as planned. Someone won a trophy. Someone else posted pictures of a record catch, the fish held up against the bright winter sky. When I scroll past the photos on social media now, I find myself zooming in, looking at the ice in the background, searching for any sign of warping, any hint of shadows moving beneath. I do not know what I'm hoping to see. Proof would be worse than doubt. But doubt is a poor pillow. Sometimes, on nights when the temperature drops fast and the house creaks in protest, I swear I can feel that slow, heavy heartbeat again, pulsing up from deep underground. It is easy to forget that lakes are not really frozen solid, that beneath the thin crust we skate and drill and walk on, there's a vast black world moving at its own pace, indifferent to whether we believe in what lives there or not. I used to tell my students that monsters are metaphors, that we invent them to explain the parts of ourselves and our world we cannot handle directly. Now, when Riley asks why we do not go ice fishing anymore, I think about that pale face rising from the darkness, the eyes that were not mine looking back through the hole, and I give him a different answer. Because some doors, I say, are not meant to be opened from either side. The winter my sister disappeared, the snow came early and did not know when to stop. By late November, the roads outside town were already narrowed to icy tunnels, the plows fighting a losing battle against drifts that crept higher every day. Mom kept saying it reminded her of the winters from her childhood, the kind where schools stayed closed for a week and people skied down the middle of Main Street. I just remembered the way the sky seemed closer, a low gray ceiling pressing down on everything. Maybe that is why nobody questioned it at first when Zara walked out into that white void and did not come back. She left on a Thursday afternoon, sometime between the last text she sent me about the pies she was picking up and the moment Mom realized the turkey had been in the oven 15 minutes too long because she had not heard the back door open. It was the day before Thanksgiving, the one we all call Travel Day, chaotic even in the best conditions. I was at my apartment across town, elbow deep in spreadsheets I had brought home from the office. Mom texted me a photo of the table half set, the good plates already out. The kind of domestic pride she used to hide when Dad was still alive. Underneath, she wrote, "Your sister is late. What else is new?" An hour later, the tone changed. The messages started coming faster, shorter. "Have you heard from her?" "She's not answering. Call me now." By the time I got Mom on the phone, she was standing at the kitchen window, watching the snow swallow the driveway. She said the bakery had called, asking why nobody had picked up the order. She said Zara had left the house wearing that green parka she loved, the one with the fake fur hood, and her boots with the worn heels. No hat, because she never listened. It takes 15 minutes to drive from Mom's house to the bakery on Harrison in good weather. That afternoon, you could barely see the end of the block. The blizzard warnings had started that morning, the radio repeating the same calm, firm instructions about staying off the roads unless absolutely necessary. Zara, being Zara, had insisted she would be fine. "It is just snow," she had said, rolling her eyes. "We live in Montana, not Florida." When she did not show up at the bakery and did not come back home, time started to warp. Mom called me. I called Zara. It went straight to voicemail. Mom called the bakery again. They said they had not seen her. I drove across town in slow, tense silence, my hazard lights blinking, the snow hissing against my windshield like static. By the time I pulled into Mom's driveway, my shoulders were knotted from gripping the steering wheel too hard. The police told us what they always tell families at first. It had only been a few hours. Maybe she had stopped somewhere else. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she had decided to wait out the storm at a friend's house. People do not vanish between point A and point B in their own hometown at 3 in the afternoon. That kind of thing happens on television, not on the highway you grew up driving. They promised to keep an eye out. They told us to call if she did not come back by morning. She did not. The second day, the search began in earnest. Patrol cars crawled the main roads while volunteers from town gathered at the fire station with thermoses of coffee and borrowed radios. A few snowmobiles were brought in from the next county. The local news did a segment that night. Our family standing under bright lights in the church hall, Mom clutching a framed photo of Zara at her college graduation. I remember watching myself on the television later and thinking I looked like someone imitating grief. The movement stiff and slightly delayed, like my brain and body were on a half-second lag. Outside, the blizzard kept pounding the town. Visibility dropped so low that the search teams had to keep calling each other back to base. It felt obscene that the weather could have that much power over something so urgent. The third day passed in a blur of phone calls, visits from officers, neighbors dropping off food we did not eat. The fourth morning dawned with a strange, brittle hush. The snow had stopped. The sky was a hard, bright blue, the sun glaring off drifts that came up to my waist. It looked beautiful in that cruel way that disaster scenes sometimes do after the worst has already happened. They found her that afternoon. The call came just after 3. A search team on snowmobiles had spotted something near the tree line off an old logging road, 100 yards from where they had been focusing their efforts. A splash of dark green against the endless white. They did not say the words over the phone, but they did not have to. Mom made a sound I had never heard from a human throat before, and I knew. By the time we reached the site, the area was already taped off. Police vehicles and an ambulance sat at odd angles on the narrow road, their tires half buried. The snow was churned up by boots and tracks. I caught a glimpse of the green parka on a stretcher as they loaded it, the fur hood stiff with frost. I did not see her face. Part of me still wonders if some stubborn, childlike part of my brain would have refused to believe it was her if I had. The official story, the one we were given in pieces over the following days, sounded simple enough on paper. Zara had left the main road for reasons nobody could explain and become disoriented in the whiteout. She had wandered into the woods and succumbed to the cold, exposure, hypothermia, words that made it sound like a gentle slipping away, a slow, quiet fade. But there were details that did not fit neatly into that narrative. Little burrs that caught and snagged whenever we tried to move on. For one thing, her boots were not on her feet when they found her. They were neatly placed side by side a few yards away, half buried in snow, as if she had taken them off and set them down. Her socks were missing entirely. Her coat was unzipped despite the brutal cold, her gloves stuffed into the pockets. The detective assigned to the case explained that paradoxical undressing is not uncommon in severe hypothermia, that the body can misinterpret the final stages of freezing as warmth. It was meant to be reassuring, an answer where there had been a question. It did not feel that way. Then there were the drawings. They came up a week later, when I finally forced myself to enter Zara's room at Mom's house to help sort through her things. It had been left exactly as it was that morning. Bed unmade, half a cup of coffee on the nightstand, her favorite sweater tossed over the back of the chair. The air still smelled faintly of her shampoo. I sat on the floor and went through her desk drawers, expecting nothing more sinister than old receipts and dried-out pens. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of unpaid parking tickets, I found the notebook. It was one of those cheap spiral pads you buy in bulk at office supply stores. The cover bent and scuffed. Inside, the pages were filled with the same image repeated over and over, a roughly drawn circle with 3 lines radiating downward from it, like a child's idea of a simplified tree or a stick figure with too many legs. Sometimes she had drawn it small in the corner, sometimes it took up the entire page. After the 10th or 15th repetition, my skin started to crawl. She had not signed or dated any of them, but a receipt stuffed between 2 pages was from the bakery on Harrison 3 weeks before she disappeared. When I showed the notebook to Mom, she went gray and sat down without a word. We took it to the detective, who flipped through it with a frown and said something about stress, about people doodling compulsively when they are anxious. He asked if Zara had a history of mental health issues. Mom bristled. I said no. It was not until the day of the funeral that I saw the symbol again. The church was packed, the air suffocatingly warm from too many bodies in winter coats. The pastor spoke about seasons and cycles and faith. The words washed over me without meaning. I was staring at the closed casket, at the arrangement of white lilies on top, when a sliver of wood near the base caught the light at an odd angle. There, etched into the polished surface, right where the pallbearer's hands would rest, was a small, scratched version of the same circle with 3 lines. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. After the service, when most people had filed out, I moved closer. Mom was in the vestibule, accepting hugs she would not remember later. The funeral director was distracted with paperwork. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the mark. It was shallow but deliberate. The wood slightly rough to the touch where the varnish had been cut. Someone had carved it there. Whether before or after the casket arrived at the church, I could not say. I did not tell Mom about it. I did not tell the detective. What proof did I have that it meant anything beyond the way it tightened something low in my gut? It could have been a meaningless scrape, a coincidence. But when they lowered the casket into the frozen ground later that day, the wind knifing through my black coat, I could not shake the feeling that we were missing a link in a chain I could not see the length of. Life did what it always does, even after something like that. It went on. I went back to my apartment, then back to work. People were kind in that awkward, halting way that says they are afraid of saying the wrong thing more than they are afraid of your pain. Mom started going to a support group at the community center. Dad's old friends stopped by more often. The deep snow around town shrank gradually into dirty piles at the corners of parking lots. By March, the blizzard felt like something that had happened in a different life. Then one evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was a scam. The message was short, the kind that would normally be a link to something malicious. There was no link, though, just 4 words and an image. The words were, "Did she draw this?" followed by a photo of a wooden trail marker somewhere in the woods, its paint peeling and its post half buried in snow. On the flat surface of the marker, carved deep and darkened with age, was the circle with 3 downward lines. I sat there on my couch, the television flickering soundless in the background, and stared at the photo until my eyes burned. The number had a local area code. When I called, it went straight to a generic voicemail with no name. I did not leave a message. I forwarded the image to my email, zoomed in and out, looking for clues. A particular tree, a recognizable ridgeline, anything. The only thing that stood out was the fact that the carving was old. Moss had grown into the grooves. Weather had softened the edges. This was not something Zara had scratched there a few weeks before. She vanished. I still have no explanation that satisfies either my logical mind or whatever part of me feels her absence like a missing limb. The official file remains unchanged. Accidental exposure in extreme weather. Whenever I push, politely at first and then less so, I'm met with the same wall of phrases. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. Sometimes people just get lost. I know people say grief makes you see patterns that are not there, that the brain, desperate for order, starts connecting dots in random static. Maybe that is what I am doing when I trace that symbol on scrap paper during long meetings, the circle and its 3 lines appearing beneath my fingers before I realize what I'm drawing. Maybe it is nothing more than a shape that got lodged in my head because my sister sketched it when she should have been working. But on nights when the wind rises and the sky turns that same flat gray as the day she vanished, I think about the old trail marker in the anonymous photo, about the gouge in the side of her casket, about the pages and pages in her notebook. I think about how certain the detective sounded when he said there was nowhere she could have gone but into the storm, and I wonder, not for the first time, whether he was wrong about that. Because when I close my eyes in those hours just before sleep, I do not see Zara stumbling blindly through whiteout. I see her walking toward something only she could see, something marked with a simple symbol we still do not understand, disappearing not into the storm itself, but into whatever waited for her within it. The first rule at Aldercrest Ski Resort was simple. Stay off the closed trails. There were others, of course. No skiing alone at night, no alcohol on the lifts, helmets strongly recommended, but that red-on-white sign at the top of every run was the one management repeated at every staff meeting. They said it was about liability and avalanche risk. They said it was about keeping guests safe. They never said it might be about keeping guests from finding what I found. I had been working there for 5 seasons by then, long enough to know the mountain in all its moods. The bright, crowded weekends when the slopes were a river of color and noise. The quiet weekday mornings when only locals carved fresh lines in the corduroy. The whiteout days when the world narrowed to the few feet in front of your goggles and even the pine trees leaned in, listening. I knew every run, every hidden dip, every rock that liked to pretend it was buried, and then rip the base off your skis if you forgot where it lay. That winter, something was off. It started with the resignations. First it was Jonah, a lift tech who had been there longer than anyone. He turned in his badge the first week of December, saying only that he was moving back east. Then it was Caro from Ski Patrol, the one who had pulled more than one drunk tourist out of a tree well without so much as a complaint. She stopped showing up for shifts. When the manager finally reached her, she said she would mail her uniform back. No explanation. No goodbye beers. Just gone. Whispers filled the staff locker room. People said there had been an accident on North Peak in preseason training, something ugly that had been quietly handled. Someone else said they had heard voices on the radio at night, calls that never made it into the log. Management brushed it all off. Staffing shortages, burnout, the usual. Still, at the next safety briefing, they spent an extra 10 minutes on the closed trails. Those ropes are there for a reason, the operations director said, his gaze sweeping the room. You go under them. You're done here. No exceptions. He was looking at me when he said it. Maybe because he knew I was the kind of person who liked to see for himself why rules existed. On New Year's Eve, I broke that rule. The crowds had thinned after sunset, families heading back to their condos to defrost before midnight. The night skiing crowd was mostly locals and college kids, their breath turning to steam as they lined up for the lift. The temperature had dropped fast once the sun went down, each inhalation biting at the back of my throat. I was on sweep duty, the last instructor down the mountain after closing. My job to make sure no one had decided to nap in a snowbank. The radio crackled at my hip. Last chair had gone up. The resort lights below turned the base area into a warm, glowing island in a sea of frigid dark. Above me, the floodlights along the main trails painted the snow an icy blue-white. Off to the side, just beyond the reach of those lights, the closed black diamond trail known as Widow's Run dropped away into shadow. Its entrance, marked by a rope strung between two poles and a weathered sign, closed for season. We all knew the story that gave it that name. Years ago, long before my time, a local had gone off the marked trail during a storm and triggered a slide that buried him so deep they did not recover his body until spring. The resort had closed the run officially a year later, citing terrain instability. Unofficially, patrollers told each other there were layers in the snowpack up there that never settled right, that hummed under your skis like a warning before you felt the first crack. I told myself I was curious about the conditions. I told myself it would be a quick look, just down to the first bend where the trail curved out of sight, then back up to the main run. No harm, nobody to see. The radio on my hip was silent. The lifts had stopped turning. The mountain above me was a dark, silent mass against the stars. I ducked under the rope. The difference was instant. On the main trail, the snow was groomed, the surface even and predictable under my skis. On Widow's Run, it was wild. Wind-sculpted drifts, pockets of loose powder, exposed patches where the underlying crust showed through like old bone. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel of light ahead of me. The trees crowding the edge of the run leaned closer, their branches heavy with snow. I pushed off, letting gravity take me. For a few seconds, it was just skiing, the familiar rush of cold air, the hiss of skis on snow, the rhythmic burn in my thighs as I carved. The mountain fell away beneath me in a steep, exhilarating drop. It felt almost clean. No crowds, no radios, no shouted instructions, just me and the slope. Then my pole tip caught on something. It was subtle. A tiny snag that jolted up through my arm and made me glance to the side. The snow at the edge of the trail looked wrong. At first, I thought it was just a depression from wind, a natural hollow where the powder had drifted unevenly. But the shape of it tugged at some part of my brain that recognized patterns and shadows. It was too rectangular, too straight at the edges, like the outline of something buried. I slowed to a stop, my breath loud in the sudden quiet. The resort's lights were hidden now, the base area out of sight around the curve. I was alone with the sound of my own breathing and the faint clicks and sighs of the mountain settling. My headlamp beams swept across the snow, catching on the edge of the depression again. Only now I could see that one corner jutted upward a little, a hard angle poking through the powder. I should have turned around. Instead, I stepped out of my bindings and waded toward it. Each step sank mid-calf, the cold seeping through my ski pants. When I reached the protrusion, I knelt and brushed snow away with my gloved hands. The edge that emerged was not rock. It was plastic, thick, scratched, and the murky gray of something that had spent too long in the elements. The more snow I cleared, the clearer the shape became. It was a storage bin, the kind you might use in a garage to hold old decorations or camping gear. Only this one was buried chest deep in a drift halfway down a closed trail, the lid strapped down tight with two ratchet straps gone stiff from cold. My heart climbed into my throat. Every horror story I had ever heard about bodies in trunks and shallow graves flickered through my mind. I sat back on my heels, my eyes darting down the slope and back up, as if someone might appear out of the darkness at any second to tell me this was a joke, a sick prank left over from preseason training. Nobody came. I told myself it was probably equipment, maybe old snow fence or patrol gear someone had stashed and forgotten. But the straps looked new, their metal clasps barely rusted. There were drag marks in the snow, leading up from the trees, faint but visible under my headlamp. I do not know how long I stared at it before I realized I was not alone. There, half buried a few feet downhill, was a glove. At least, that is what I thought it was until I looked closer. The fingers were splayed, frozen stiff. The leather cracked. Beneath the cuff, pale skin showed. It took my brain a full 3 seconds to understand that the glove was still attached to a hand. I stumbled backward, a hoarse noise tearing out of my throat. For a moment, the world narrowed to the beam of my headlamp and the stark image within it. A human hand protruding from the snow, the fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for the surface. The skin had that waxy, too smooth look I had only ever seen in the bodies we sometimes hauled off the mountain after heart attacks, a kind of stillness that did not belong to sleep. Training kicked in where rational thought failed. I scrambled for my radio, my hands clumsy in my gloves. "Ski Patrol, this is Riley on North Peak," I said, my voice shaking. "I need a team on Widow's Run, now. I have possible human remains." There was a crackle, then a burst of overlapping voices. Questions, location confirmations. Someone swore softly off mic. They told me to stay put, to mark my position, to keep my headlamp on. I stared at the hand and tried not to imagine the rest of the body under the snow, the weight of it pressing down. The first patrol sled reached me faster than I expected. The team leader, a guy named Mark, who'd been on the mountain since I was in high school, skidded to a stop a few yards away. His face, usually ruddy from the cold and wind, had gone a flat, unreadable pale. "What the hell are you doing down here?" he muttered, but his eyes were already on the bin, on the hand. They worked quickly, practiced. One patroller started flagging the area, planting small reflective markers in the snow. Another began probing around the hand with his pole, careful not to jostle it. Mark knelt by the bin, brushing more snow away, his jaw clenched. When he found the ratchet straps, he swore again under his breath. "This should not be here," he said. The words sounded less like an observation and more like an accusation thrown at the mountain itself. By the time they had uncovered enough to see that the hand was attached to an entire arm, more lights were bobbing down the trail. Management, more patrol, someone from law enforcement. The air filled with the overlapping murmur of low voices, the hiss of radios, the squeak of boots packing down fresh snow. They told me to stay back. I did, physically at least. Mentally, I was already somewhere else, watching the scene from a distance, like it was happening on one of the true crime shows my sister liked to fall asleep to. The lid came off the bin, with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the cold air. People looked away. One of the newer patrollers turned and vomited quietly into the snow. I did not see everything inside, but I saw enough. Fabric, hair, the pale curve of a cheek, the distinct metallic smell that cuts through even the sharpest winter air and sinks into the back of your throat. Later, we would learn that the body in the bin was not the only one. The police cordoned off the entire trail. Rumors leaked out in the days that followed, slipping past the official statements like water through cupped hands. They had found another bin farther down, older, its contents reduced to almost nothing. There were signs of more, long since swept away by slides and spring thaws. The timeline they pieced together made my skin crawl. Missing persons from the past decade, seasonal workers who had moved on, tourists who had skipped town, a woman from 2 winters back whose car had been found abandoned halfway down the mountain road. The resort went into damage control mode, meetings, memos, carefully worded press releases about cooperating fully with the investigation. They emphasized that all trails had been searched thoroughly, that guest safety was their top priority. They did not talk about the closed run by name. They did not have to. Everyone on staff knew. In the locker room, people spoke in low voices about who had access to the mountain after hours, about which employees had quit suddenly, about the odd, offhand comments some of them had made about the mountain keeping her secrets. Faces I had known for years began to look different in my memory, shadows lengthening where I had not noticed them before. They never arrested anyone from the resort, at least not publicly. The official line was that the investigation was ongoing. Privately, one of the patrol guys told me the detectives were leaning toward an outside contractor who had worked snow removal for years, a man who knew every back road and maintenance path, who had stopped showing up the previous spring. They think he used the avalanches to cover his tracks, the patroller said. You bury something on a slope you know is unstable, nature finishes the job for you. The resort reopened Widow's Run 2 seasons later under a new name, after blasting and reshaping the slope. Marketing called it a fresh start. I transferred to a different mountain by then. I could not keep standing under those lights smiling at guests pretending that the snow beneath us was just snow. On paper, what I did that night was the kind of thing that gets people fired. I ducked a rope. I broke a rule that existed for good reasons. Sometimes when I lie awake and hear the wind scraping against my apartment window, I think about how easily it could have gone the other way, how one wrong step could have turned me into another anonymous weight in the snow. Then I remember the hand, the bin, the way Mark's voice shook when he said, "This should not be here." And I realized there was another rule I broke that night, one the resort never wrote down. The one that says some things are better left buried. I'm not sorry. The first time my grandmother appeared on my doorbell camera, I thought it was a glitch, a compression artifact, or some weird lag from the Wi-Fi. That was easier to believe than the alternative because we had buried her 3 months earlier to the day. I'd picked out the dress she was wearing in the casket myself. Pale blue, long sleeves, lace at the collar. The same dress she was wearing when she stood on my front porch in the middle of a January night, staring straight into the lens. Winter in our town is not cinematic. It is not twinkling lights and charming snowfalls. It is a long, gray bruise that settles over everything from November to March. I bought the doorbell camera in December, after a week of package thefts in the neighborhood chat, and one break-in 3 blocks over. It felt like the responsible adult thing to do. Install the app, connect the device, pretend silicon and glass could keep the world at bay. The first alert came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging me out of a dream I could not remember. I groped for it, squinting against the blue light. Motion detected at your front door. The thumbnail preview was just a blur of static and shadow. I told myself it was a car's headlights sweeping across the porch or a gust of wind pushing snow into the lens. Still, my heart picked up a little as I tapped the notification. The video opened to a view of my front steps glazed in ice, the porch light casting a weak halo on the snow. For a second, nothing. Then a figure stepped into frame, as if emerging from the darkness itself. A woman in a long, pale dress that should not have been worn by anyone in this weather, much less an old woman with bad circulation. Her hair was pulled back in the same loose bun Nana wore every Sunday. Her posture was almost painfully familiar. The camera's infrared made her eyes look darker than they had in life, but the tilt of her head, the set of her mouth, those were the same. She stood there, perfectly still, as the timer in the corner ticked seconds away. No knocking. No shifting from foot to foot against the cold. Just unwavering presence, like she had all the time in the world. Then she smiled. It was not one of the warm, crinkly smiles I had known. It was too slow, too deliberate, starting at the corners and spreading with the care of someone trying on an expression they had seen other people wear. The video ended with that half-finished curve on her lips and the porch light flickering once before returning to its normal dim glow. I watched it 3 times, my mouth dry. The rational side of my brain shuffled through possibilities. A neighbor playing a prank, someone in a costume, an old video overlaid by some software error. I told myself it could not be her. It was winter. The dead stayed where we left them. That was the point of graves and headstones and casseroles. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I had been half asleep, more dream than reality. I did not mention it to anyone. At work, while my coworkers complained about road salt and heating bills, I kept seeing that slow, wrong smile in my mind's eye. The next night, the alert came again. 2:47 a.m. Motion at your front door. This time, I did not hesitate. I sat up, thumb already swiping. The video was shorter, but there was no glitch, no argument left. The view snapped into focus on a sheet of frost covering the glass panel next to my door. At first, it was just an even, opaque white. Then lines began to appear, as if drawn by an invisible fingertip. A curve, another, 3 jagged strokes across. It took me a full heartbeat to recognize the shape forming in the frost. It was a heart with a crack through it. The same childish broken heart doodle Nana used to draw in the margins of letters when she was being dramatic. I'd found it on old recipe cards and birthday notes. Seeing it form on my window in freezing condensation, each line appearing with agonizing slowness, felt like being dunked into ice water. Behind the drawing, just barely visible as a shadow on the porch, was the suggestion of that same pale dress. My chest tightened. My first impulse was to call someone. My second was to delete the footage and pretend it had never existed. In the end, I did neither. I saved the video, locked my bedroom door, ridiculous, I know, and lay awake until dawn, listening to the heating system groan. The third night, I did not sleep at all. I sat on the couch with the app open, the live view of my own dark porch, a tiny rectangle in my palm. Outside, the wind scraped at the siding. The streetlight at the corner blinked fitfully. Midnight came and went. At 2:40, my fingers had gone numb around the phone. At 2:46, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. At 2:47, the feed stuttered. For half a second, the image pixelated into colored blocks. When it snapped back into clarity, she was there. Not in the pre-recorded detachment of the previous nights, but live, right now, standing on my front porch. The same dress, the same bun, the same eyes, only now they flicked directly toward the tiny camera lens instead of slightly to the side. "Nana," I whispered, absurdly, to my empty living room. She moved for the first time. One hand, thin with knuckles I remembered moisturizing for her in the hospital, lifted slowly and reached toward the door. Her palm flattened against the glass. The frost that had crusted there earlier melted under her touch, rivulets of water tracing the outline of her fingers before freezing again in an instant. My phone vibrated with the delayed notification asking if I wanted to speak through the intercom. I stared at the button. Every horror story I had ever heard screamed that answering anything at your door at 2:47 a.m. was a bad idea, especially if you had buried it yourself. But I could not stop thinking about the way she used to sit in her kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, telling me that after people die, they live on as long as someone remembers them. My thumb hovered, then pressed. "Hello?" The word came out thin and small through the tiny speaker. On the screen, her head tilted. The smile that spread across her face this time was closer to the one I knew. Soft. Sad. Her lips moved, but for a heartbeat the audio lagged. Then, faint and warped by the cheap speaker, came her voice. "Cold out here, little bird." It was what she had always called me when I showed up at her house shivering, cheeks red from winter air. The term of endearment landed in my chest like a physical blow. My eyes burned. Some part of me knew this was wrong, that memory and technology and grief had tangled into something unnatural. Another part of me did not care. You cannot be here," I said, my voice trembling. On the screen, she chuckled, the sound thin and crackling. It sent a ripple through the frost on the glass. For a fraction of a second, her face flickered, the edges of her silhouette blurring, as if the camera could not quite hold her shape. Then she was solid again. "You never did like letting go," she said. The call cut off with a soft click. The live view dropped back to the wide shot of my empty porch. No figure, no handprint, just the faint outline of a heart in the frost, melting slowly into nothing. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. The roads were slick, salt turning the snow at the edges into gray slush. The cemetery gates were half buried. The path to her grave, a narrow trench carved by other visitors' boots. I followed it, my breath fogging in front of me, fingers aching from the cold despite my gloves. Her headstone was simple: name, dates, a line my mother had chosen. "Forever in our hearts." The ground around it was pristine, untouched. No marks in the snow, no signs of disturbance. I told myself I was relieved. Then I saw something at the base of the stone, a small depression in the snow, no bigger than a saucer, perfectly round. The frost there had melted and refrozen in ridges, like something warm had rested there for a long while before leaving. Tucked neatly against the stone, half buried, was a piece of jewelry. It was the silver locket we had buried her with, the one she had never taken off in life. The chain was coiled like a snake, the metal so cold it burned when I picked it up. I remembered fastening it around her neck in the funeral home, my fingers clumsy with shock. I remembered the way her skin had felt then, waxy and too still. Now the locket was icy but unmistakably real in my palm. When I clicked it open, expecting old photos, I found something else instead. The inside surfaces were fogged slightly, as if someone had breathed onto the metal and closed it quickly, trapping the condensation. In that fog, faint but visible, a fingertip had traced the same broken heart shape that had formed on my window. I closed it and did not tell anyone what I had found. For a while after that, the camera stopped alerting me at 2:47. Weeks went by with nothing more sinister than the mail carrier or a raccoon. The broken heart shapes stopped appearing in the frost. I started sleeping through the night again, though not as deeply as before. A part of me missed the alerts, which is the part I am most ashamed of. Grief is selfish that way. It makes even terror feel like a connection. Then, one night in late February, my phone buzzed again. Multiple faces detected at your front door. My stomach dropped. The thumbnail preview was darker than usual, the porch light a distant smudge. I tapped it open, already bracing myself. The live view resolved into an image that made my skin crawl in a way the earlier visits had not. The porch was full. Not bursting, not crowded, but occupied by shapes that were wrong in their stillness. In front, closest to the camera, was my grandmother in her pale blue dress. Behind her, huddled tight together, were others. Some faces I recognized from the newspaper's obituary pages over the years. Mr. Callahan from 3 doors down, who had died in his sleep last winter. The florist, who used to save me peonies on my birthday. Others were strangers. All of them looked directly into the lens, their eyes dark in the infrared. My grandmother's mouth moved. No sound came through the speaker this time, but I did not need it. I knew the shape of the words as well as I knew my own name. Cold out here. The notification on my screen flashed again. We have updated your motion sensitivity due to frequent activity. Consider adjusting your privacy settings. My hand shook as I turned the phone face down on the coffee table. On the other side of the wall, the wind rose, rattling the windows in their frames. The heating system sighed. The house felt too small, its walls too thin. The camera would keep recording, whether I watched or not. I have not deleted the footage. Sometimes when the snow piles up against the front steps and the world narrows to the pool of light from my porch, I wonder what would happen if I opened the door at 2:47. If the cold that rushed in would feel like winter air or like something else. If the hand that reached for mine would be as solid as it looks. I tell myself I will never find out, but I sleep with the locket on my nightstand now, the metal icy under my fingertips when I wake. And every time the app updates and asks if I want to enable two-way audio, I feel that same tight pull in my chest, like a thread connecting me to something that should have stayed on the other side of the frost. The town was not on my map. That was the first thing that bothered me. Not the storm chewing at the edges of my headlights, not the way the highway had vanished into a featureless tunnel of white, not even the low fuel light that had blinked on 20 minutes earlier. Those were problems with names and solutions. But the sign that rose out of the snow at the side of the road, green, reflective, 3 white letters spelling Millbrook with an arrow pointing right. That sign led somewhere that did not exist on my GPS, my printed atlas, or any list of exits I had ever memorized on this route. I had been driving since dawn, trying to beat the worst of the winter system that the radio said was moving in over the mountains. Sales conferences do not care about weather, so my schedule did not either. Just outside the pass, the snow started coming down harder, thick wet flakes that stuck to the wipers and turned the world beyond the windshield into a smeared gray blur. My GPS cheerfully instructed me to continue for another 50 miles. The fuel gauge disagreed. When the green sign appeared, I felt a flood of relief out of proportion to 3 painted letters. A town meant gas, food, maybe even a motel that did not reek of stale cigarettes. I flipped on my blinker out of habit, even though there was not another car in sight, and turned off the highway onto a narrower, older road. The difference was immediate. The pavement went from smooth to patched and pitted. The snowplow's work was rougher here, 2 rutted tracks instead of a clean lane. Dark pines crowded closer to the shoulder, their branches heavy with snow. The storm seemed less like a phenomenon now and more like an environment, thick and enclosing. Recalculating, the GPS chirped from the dashboard. The map spun, then settled into a flat gray grid with my car icon drifting across it, unmoored. No roads, no names, just empty space. I told myself it was just a dead zone in the mapping data. There are plenty of them in rural states. The pavement under my wheels was as real as the ache in my shoulders. The snowplow had been here. You could see its blade marks etched into the packed crust. Towns do not need to exist on screens to exist in reality. Still, I kept glancing at the blank map, irrationally unsettled by the way my route line had simply vanished. After about 10 minutes, lights appeared through the curtain of snow. First, a lone street lamp, its halo of yellow fuzzed by flakes, then another farther ahead. The road widened into what must have been the main street. Single-story brick buildings hunched along either side, their windows glowing softly. Christmas lights, a week past their season, still framed a few doorways. A neon sign that simply said "Diner" flickered in a front window. Another sign, older, painted wood creaking on its chains, declared, "Welcome to Millbrook, Pop 1982 EST, 1897. My GPS remained blank, still insisting I was driving through nowhere. I pulled up in front of a small gas station with 2 pumps and a sagging awning, the kind of place that still had a mechanical bell that clanged when you drove over the hose. As I rolled to a stop, the bell gave a half-hearted ring. The station's office glowed warm behind streaked windows, but no one came out. I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in on me, thick as the snow. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to my own breathing. Then I grabbed my wallet, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. It was colder than it had any right to be. The kind of still, biting cold that makes your teeth ache the second you inhale. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else, metallic, like old coins. My boots crunched on the salt scattered around the pump. I glanced at the station office. The lights were on, but the windows were smeared with condensation, making it hard to see inside. "Hello?" I called, raising a hand. A shadow moved at the back of the office. Then a man emerged through the door, the little bell above it jangling weakly. He was in his 60s, maybe. With a flannel shirt under a greasy vest, a knit cap pulled low over his ears. His smile was almost too quick, appearing before his eyes had fully settled on me. "Evening," he said. "Rough night to be on the road." Yeah, I answered, forcing a laugh. Just need a fill-up, and maybe some directions. He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag that looked like it had been white once. Pump is old. You pay in here after. We keep it simple. I started the pump. The numbers on the analog dial climbed with a slow, ticking reluctance. The man leaned against the doorframe, watching me with that same too-ready smile. Passing through, he asked. Conference in the city, I said. Got off the highway because my gas light came on. Did not know there was a town here, honestly. Lots of people say that, he replied. We are easy to miss if you're not looking. Millbrook's been here a long time, though. Longer than that highway. Folks used to come through on the old road before they built it. Some still find their way here, when they need to. The way he said that last part made a small shiver crawl down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I nodded non-committally and focused on the pump. The needle on my tank gauge slowly lifted from its resting place, near empty. When the tank was full, I went inside to pay. The office was warmer than I expected, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and something frying on a hot plate. A small TV in the corner played a black and white movie with the sound off. A calendar on the wall showed January, but the year printed along the top was wrong, 1987. Old thing, the man said when he saw me looking. Like the picture, never bothered to change it. The picture was of a snow-covered main street that looked almost exactly like the one outside, down to the shape of the lampposts and the curve of the road. The only difference was the cars. In the photo, they were boxy, all hard angles and chrome. Outside, the few vehicles I could see through the streaked window were more modern shapes, but there were not many. I paid in cash. The credit card machine sat on the counter, unplugged, a thin film of dust on its keypad. When I asked about a motel, the man's smile widened. Only one in town, he said, street over. Millbrook Inn, 2-story brick job sign with a pine tree. You cannot miss it. Room will be cheap. We do not get many overnight guests this time of year. He said it like a recommendation. It sounded more like a warning. Still, the thought of getting back on the highway with the storm intensifying made my stomach knot. I thanked him, took my receipt, and stepped back into the cold. As I drove through town toward the inn, I noticed more details that felt slightly off. The clothes in the thrift store window were older styles, high-waisted jeans and neon windbreakers arranged on headless mannequins. The posters tacked up on the bulletin board outside the town hall were for events that had already happened. A harvest festival in October. A Christmas concert 3 weeks past. The dates on them all ended in the same 2 digits. 87. The Millbrook Inn looked exactly as described. 2 stories of dark brick. Windows glowing amber against the snow. A wooden sign with a painted pine tree hung above the entrance, its paint cracked. I parked, my tires crunching over a crust of ice, and hauled my overnight bag from the back seat. The lobby smelled like old carpet cleaner and cinnamon potpourri. The woman at the front desk could have been anywhere between 40 and 60. Her hair was piled in a careful twist, and she wore a blouse with shoulder pads that made her look like she had walked out of a family photo album from my childhood. Her expression was friendly in a way that felt practiced, like the smile came first and the welcome followed. "Welcome to Millbrook," she said. "You're just in time. Storm is going to close the roads completely soon." "How bad does it get?" I asked, signing the faded ledger she pushed toward me. No computer. No key cards. Just a heavy brass key with a chipped plastic fob. She tilted her head, considering. "Bad enough," she said. "But it never lasts as long as you think it will." As I wrote my name, my hand paused. On the line above mine, under guest, was a familiar last name. My own. Different first name, same spelling. The date in the column next to it read January 4th, 1987. "Family been through here before?" the woman asked lightly, following my gaze. "Not that I know of," I said. She gave a small, knowing hum, as if that answered something for her even if it did not for me. The room was plain but clean. One double bed, a dresser with a bolted-down TV, a small bathroom with a shower that groaned but produced hot water. The window looked out over Main Street. The snow had picked up, swirling under the streetlights in frantic gusts. For a moment, watching it, the strangeness of the town seemed less important than the simple fact of being out of it. Sheltered. Alone. I slept hard and dreamless. When I woke, pale light seeped around the curtains. The silence was profound. No hum of traffic. No plow scraping asphalt. Just the faint hiss of the radiator and my own heartbeat. I checked my phone. No signal. The time read 7:12 a.m. The date had not changed. It still thought it was yesterday. My stomach knotted with a vague, irrational dread. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. The lobby was empty. No one at the desk. No murmur of voices from the little dining room off the hall. The front door was unlocked. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and was hit with a blast of air so still and cold it felt staged, like walking into a freezer. The sky overhead was a flawless glassy blue. The storm was gone. So, it seemed, was everything else. The cars that had lined the street the night before were gone. Every parking space empty. No footprints in the fresh snow except my own leading from the inn's door. The diner across the street was dark, its windows blank. The gas station sign in the distance hung at a slightly different angle, the letters on its marquee gone. The only sound was the faint creak of the inn sign in the motionless air. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No answer. No movement behind any of the windows lining Main Street. Curtains hung still. Christmas lights that had glowed the night before now looked dull and lifeless, some missing entirely. I walked to the gas station, my boots leaving sharp prints. The bell above the driveway hose did not ring when I drove over it. The office door was locked. When I cupped my hands to the glass and peered inside, I saw overturned chairs, a layer of dust on the counter, the old calendar on the wall curled at the edges. The year at the top was faded, but I could still make out the last two digits. 87. My pulse thudded in my ears. I backed away, scanning the street. Everywhere I looked, there were small differences. A sign missing here, a building's paint more peeled than it had been. The bulletin board's posters were sun-bleached and tattered, their dates long past. The only fresh marks in the snow were mine. I do not know how long I stood there, turning in a slow circle before the first sound broke the silence. It was faint, nearly lost in the ringing in my ears, a low, distant hum. I turned toward it instinctively. Down the road, past the last of the buildings, the highway rose like a gray ribbon out of the trees. A truck rumbled by, throwing up arcs of slush, its driver oblivious. Another car followed. The world beyond Millbrook was moving, alive, utterly normal. I walked toward it, each step faster than the last. At the edge of town, the literal edge, where the pavement of Main Street met the highway on-ramp, there was no welcome sign. No indication a town had been there at all, just a break in the guardrail and a patch of older, rougher asphalt that joined the newer surface at a faint seam. I stepped over it and felt something like pressure release. Behind me, Millbrook's Main Street lay quiet. Ahead, cars hissed by at 70 miles an hour. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with numb fingers. A flood of notifications hit at once. Missed calls, emails, a text from my manager asking if I had made it through the storm all right. The date at the top of the screen had advanced by 1 day. I looked back once more. From this angle, through the shifting light and heat haze of passing vehicles, the road I had just walked seemed less real, less solid. As I watched, a truck roared by, blocking my view for a heartbeat. When it passed, the space where the road had been was just a snowbank and trees. No town, no lights, no sagging inn sign creaking in the still air. Just the highway and my own sharp footprints in the snow leading from nowhere to the on-ramp. I merged back into traffic like a man waking from a dream he could not quite shake. At the next gas station, I asked the clerk if he had ever heard of Millbrook. He frowned, thought for a moment, and shook his head. "Not around here," he said. "You sure you have the name right?" I nodded, but said nothing more. Since then, I have tried to find it again. Not physically, I am not that reckless, but on maps, in old records, in forgotten corners of the internet. I have found half a dozen Millbrooks in other states, other directions. None in that stretch of highway. The only thing that comes close is a reference in a scanned newspaper clipping from 1988 about a town evacuated after a chemical spill. Its residents relocated, its buildings demolished. Millbrook, the article says. Population 1,982, established 1897, officially removed from state maps as of January 4th, 1987, the date of the last name above mine in the inn's ledger. Some nights, when the snow is coming down hard and the road outside my apartment is slick and empty, I dream of that street again. The glow of the diner sign, the warm lobby, the clerk's knowing smile. The next morning, I always check my phone, just to make sure the date has changed. Every town has at least one stupid winter dare. Ours was the frozen lake game. The rules were simple enough to make it sound harmless and just old enough to give it weight. You went out onto Thornton Lake at midnight on the winter solstice, walked to the center, turned off all your lights, and called out to the ice. If anything answered in a voice you knew, you were supposed to leave immediately and never come back. If nothing answered, you were safe for another year. That was the theory, anyway. I had grown up hearing versions of the story from older kids who claimed their cousin's friend had done it and heard his dead grandfather. By the time I was in college and back home for winter break, the legend had been diluted into something people joked about over cheap beer. The kind of thing you dared each other to do because you did not believe in it, but you wanted to see who secretly might. That was how I ended up standing on the frozen surface of Thornton Lake at 11:58 p.m., my boots squeaking on the snow-dusted ice, breath fogging in the blue dark, wondering when exactly I had stopped taking anything seriously. "It is not even that cold," Jake said behind me, which was a lie. The kind you tell because admitting you are freezing makes you sound less brave. His headlamp carved a shaky tunnel of light across the ice. Mariah and Dean trailed a little behind, each carrying a thermos, their laughter a bit too loud. "Phone's off," Dean called. "That is the rule. No lights except headlamps until we get to the middle." I glanced back at the shoreline. The trees were a black wall, branches heavy with snow. Beyond them, the faint orange glow of town streetlights did not quite reach the lake. The only solid reference point was the dock, already a dark rectangle half swallowed by distance. I turned my phone off and slid it into my pocket, the sudden absence of its weight as a connection to the outside world, making the night feel thicker. We walked in a loose line toward the center, following the faint ghost of old skate scratches frozen into the surface from earlier in the season. The ice was easily a foot thick. The town measured it every year and posted the numbers at the boat launch, but it still flexed in my mind. A thin shell over black water. Every small creak underfoot made my shoulders climb toward my ears. "Wait until I tell my mom we did this," Mariah said, her voice bouncing oddly across the flat space. "She will freak out." "Do not," I said automatically. "She still cries when she sees my brother's snowboard in the garage. You tell her we were on the lake at midnight, and she will burn it." The air went a little quieter after I said my brother, like the night itself had flinched. None of them replied right away. They all knew about Noah. Everyone in town did. You do not lose a 17-year-old in a chairlift malfunction at the local hill without it becoming the defining story of that winter. "We will not mention it," Jake said, finally softer. "This is just for us." We reached the rough center of the lake a minute later, give or take. There were no markers, just our sense of distance from the shore in every direction. The trees ringed us in a dark circle. Above, the sky was a low lid of cloud. reflecting the faint light pollution from town and turning it into a dull, oppressive glow. The ice beneath my boots felt simultaneously solid and fragile, like glass that had forgotten it could break. "This is it," Dean said, his breath puffing white in the beam of his lamp. "Everyone, kill your lights." One by one, the headlamps clicked off. The darkness that fell was not total, but it was close enough. The snow caught just enough ambient light to give everything a faint, grainy outline. The others became vague shapes, their shoulders and hats barely distinguishable from the night. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Okay," Mariah said, voice tight with a mix of excitement and nerves. "Who is doing the call?" The unspoken expectation settled on me like extra weight in my coat. I was the one who had suggested we come out here instead of sitting in Jake's basement playing drinking games. I was the one who claimed not to be afraid of the story because in my private logic, losing Noah to a stupid mechanical failure had used up our family's quota of random tragedy. The universe did not double dip. That was what I told myself anyway. "I will do it," I said, swallowing. The rules said you had to stand still, feet square, eyes closed, and speak clearly. You were supposed to address the lake itself, like it was an old god listening beneath the ice. I took a breath that stabbed at my lungs and shut my eyes. "Thornton Lake," I called, feeling ridiculous and scared in equal measure. If anything is down there that knows me, I'm listening. The wind skated across the surface, low and steady. Somewhere near the shore, a tree creaked. Under my boots, the ice made a long, slow groan as it adjusted to the temperature drop. I waited. My friend's presence at my back felt like 3 held breaths. Nothing answered. I let out a shaky laugh, part relief and part lingering adrenaline. "See," I said. "Nothing. It is just... Do it right," Dean cut in. "You have to actually call. That is how it goes. You said you listened to all those old stories. You know the script." He was right. The version I had heard growing up was more specific. I took another breath, my mouth dry. "Thornton Lake," I said again, louder this time. "If you hold anyone who loved me, let them speak. If you hold anyone I loved, let them answer." The words left my mouth and felt wrong, like they were not quite mine. The air seemed to thicken. A prickle ran down my spine. I kept my eyes shut. Not out of bravery now, but because suddenly I was not sure I wanted to see what might be standing with us on the ice. For a few long seconds there was only the wind. Then faint and muffled, something knocked from beneath my feet. It was not the sharp crack of ice breaking. It was a deliberate, rhythmic tap. 3 knocks in quick succession, directly under where I stood. The ice vibrated, a subtle thrum that traveled up my legs. Every muscle in my body seized. Behind me, someone sucked in a breath hard enough to whistle. "Layla," Jake whispered. "Did you feel—" The second set of knocks cut him off. This time they were followed by a scrape, like fingers dragging across the underside of a table. The sound did not make sense. The lake was at least 10 feet deep here. Probably more. There should not have been any solid surface to knock from below. There should not have been a space for anything to stand. "Stop," Mariah said. "Dean, if this is you somehow, stop, it is not funny." "It is not me," he hissed back. "I am not—" "Layla." The voice rose from the ice like breath, forcing its way through a crack. It was warped by distance and the barrier between us, but it was unmistakable. My name, in a tone I had heard 1,000 times in 1,000 different moods. Teasing, annoyed, worried. This time, it was none of those. It was raw. "Noah," I choked out before I could stop myself. "Lay," the voice said again, closer now, directly under me. Cold, it is so cold. A pressure bloomed in my chest, like all the air had been sucked out and replaced with freezing water. My knees went weak. Behind me, someone started to cry, a high, panicked sound. I opened my eyes. At first, I thought the ice was cracking. Thin white lines were spiderwebbing out from where I stood, tracing jagged paths in all directions. Then I realized They were not cracks at all. They were letters. Beneath the translucent surface, something was etching words from the inside, scraping at the underside of the ice. The lines formed loops and angles I knew too well. My brother's messy, half-cursive handwriting. He was writing my name over and over, the letters stacking on top of each other, until they blurred. "Layla, move," Jake said, his voice sharp with real fear now. "Get off that spot, now." I could not move. My feet felt rooted, not stuck physically, but pinned by something in my own skull. Guilt, maybe. Hunger. The part of me that had made this whole night into a test suddenly wanted to fail it. If this was some part of Noah reaching out, how could I step away? "Help me," the voice said. It was clearer now, unmistakable even through the wet, muffled distortion. There was a hitch to it, like he was fighting back tears. It was the hitch that broke me loose. Noah had always cried easily. Commercials, bad grades, dogs, and movies. He teared up at everything. We used to tease him for it until the night Dad left, and Noah was the only one who did not try to swallow it down. That memory hit me like a slap. My legs jolted back into motion. "I cannot," I whispered, the words tearing my throat raw. "I am sorry. I cannot." Jake's hand clamped around my arm, yanking me sideways. My boot slipped on a patch of smooth ice where the snow had blown thin. For a second, my weight shifted dangerously. Underneath, the letters rippled, as if something had slammed into the ice from below. A single hairline crack flashed across the surface, then sealed itself, the water beneath pressing it flat. We ran. All four of us, no pretense of calm now, no jokes. Our headlamps bobbed wildly as we fumbled to turn them back on. The shore felt impossibly far. The wind had picked up while we stood there. It roared past our ears now, grabbing at our coats. Behind us, the knocking came again, faster, following our retreat like a heartbeat. "Do not look back," Dean gasped. "Just go, just go." Halfway to shore, I risked it anyway. I turned my head just enough to see the center of the lake. In the circle of my headlamp, the ice where we had stood looked darker, like the water beneath had thickened. The letters of my name bloomed there in white frost, then blurred, as if a hand had wiped across them from below. Something moved under the surface, a pale shape rising, pressed against the underside of the ice like a face against glass. I saw the suggestion of eyes, the smear of a mouth forming my name one more time. Then the lights from the houses along the shore cut through the dark, and we staggered up onto solid snow. We did not stop running until we reached the parking lot by the boat launch. Only then did we collapse into a panting, shivering heap against the hood of Jake's car. My lungs burned. My legs felt hollow. "What the hell was that?" Mariah said, voice shaking. "What the actual—" "Not doing this," Dean cut in. His face was chalk white under his hat. "We are not trying to explain it. We are not going back. We are never going back." "Layla," Jake said, softer. That sounded like him. I stared out at the dark line of trees, my hands numb even inside my gloves. The lake itself was hidden from here, but I could feel it. A flat presence pressing against the edges of town. "I know," I said. We made a pact that night, huddled there in the falling snow. We would not tell anyone the full story, not our parents, not our other friends, not the bored podcasters who came through every few years to sniff around our hometown legends. We would say we went out on the ice and got spooked by the creaking and the cold. That was all. It felt like betrayal even as we agreed to it. But how do you tell your mother that her dead son is under the lake, knocking on the ice and asking why you did not pull him out? In the years since, I've kept that promise more or less. When people ask about the frozen lake game, I roll my eyes and say it is dumb. I tell them it is just a way for old-timers to scare kids into respecting thin ice. Sometimes late at night, my phone buzzes with messages from Jake or Mariah. Thinking about, or simply, do you remember the sound? As if either of us could forget. Every solstice, without fail, I wake up at 11:45 p.m. without an alarm. My body knows. I lie there in the dark of my apartment hundreds of miles from Thornton Lake now and feel that same tug in my chest. It would be so easy to get in the car, to drive north, to stand on whatever ice is left and call out again. I never do. I grip the sheets until my knuckles ache and repeat the words I choked out that night. I am sorry. Some doors, once you've heard what is on the other side, are meant to stay closed, even if the voice knocking on them sounds exactly like the one you miss most. The doctor said Sienna was lucky. Frostbite in 3 fingers, the tips going waxy and gray before we got her back to the lodge and the heat started returning feeling to her hands. They wrapped them in loose gauze, gave her something for the pain, and warned us she might lose some sensation permanently. But she kept all 10 fingers. That was what mattered. That was what I told myself when I watched her sleep in the ambulance on the way down the mountain, her breathing too shallow, her face too pale against the orange blanket they had draped over her. We had gone to Aspen for our 5th anniversary, 5 years of marriage, 10 years together, and Sienna still got excited about snow in a way that made me feel older than I was. She wanted to rent a cabin with a hot tub and spend the days on the slopes. I wanted to do whatever made her smile like that, so I booked the trip. 2 weeks in December. Champagne at sunset. The kind of vacation that looked good in photos and felt even better in person. Until the 4th night, when she wandered off the trail. We had gone for a walk after dinner. The resort had marked out a scenic loop through the woods, lit by lanterns every 20 yards or so. It was supposed to be romantic. Snowy pines, quiet paths, the kind of thing couples did when they wanted to pretend they were still in love with winter instead of exhausted by it. Sienna walked a little ahead of me, her red coat a bright smudge against the blue twilight. I was checking my phone for a text from work when I heard her call out. "Finn, look at this." I glanced up. She had stopped at a gap in the trees, the lantern light barely reaching her. Beyond her, the woods opened into a small clearing I did not remember from the trail map. The snow there looked smooth and untouched, almost glowing. "I think there is a shortcut," she said, already stepping off the path. "Sienna, wait." But she was already gone, her boots crunching through the crust. I swore under my breath and followed. The lanterns disappeared behind us almost immediately, swallowed by the trees. The clearing was bigger than it had looked from the trail, sloping gently downward into a hollow where the snow was waist-deep in places. Sienna was already halfway across, laughing at something I could not see. "This is beautiful," she called. Her voice echoed strangely in the stillness. "Why is nobody else here?" "Because it is off the trail," I said, louder than I meant to. "Come on, let us go back." She turned to look at me, and that was when I saw her expression change. The smile faded. Her eyes went distant, like she was listening to something I could not hear. She tilted her head, the way she did when she was trying to remember a song lyric or the name of someone we had met at a party. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I did not. All I heard was the wind threading through the pines and my own pulse starting to pick up for no reason I could name. "Hear what?" "Singing," she said. "It is beautiful." Before I could answer, she turned and started walking again, not toward me but deeper into the hollow. Her steps were measured, almost dreamlike. I called her name. She did not respond. Panic spiked in my chest, sharp and sudden. I stumbled after her, the snow dragging at my legs. "Sienna, stop." She kept going. The slope of the hollow steepened, and suddenly she was sliding, her boots losing purchase on the icy underlayer. She went down hard, disappearing into a drift. I lunged forward, half running and half falling, and grabbed her arm. Her glove came off in my hand, her bare fingers already turning red from the cold. That was when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, a wall of white that swallowed the clearing in seconds. The wind screamed. Snow stung my face like needles. I could barely see Sienna, even though she was right in front of me. She was staring at her hand, the one I had yanked the glove from, like she did not recognize it. "Finn," she said. Her voice sounded small, confused. "I cannot feel my fingers." We made it back to the lodge eventually. I do not remember much of the walk, just the endless white and the weight of her leaning against me, shivering so hard her teeth clacked. By the time we reached help, her hand was the color of old wax. The doctors worked fast. They said she was lucky. I kept saying it too, like a mantra. But the woman who came home from Aspen was not the woman I married. At first, the changes were small. She started waking up at odd hours, standing at the window in our bedroom and staring out at nothing. When I asked what she was doing, she would turn and smile like she had forgotten I was there. "Just looking," she would say, and climb back into bed without explanation. Then there were the things she knew that she should not. One morning, she told me my coworker Eric was going to call in sick. I laughed it off until Eric texted me an hour later saying he had the flu. Another time, she mentioned that the neighbor's dog had gotten out, even though we were inside with the curtains drawn and no barking to be heard. When I went to check, sure enough, Mrs. Calloway from 2 doors down was chasing her terrier through the snow in her bathrobe. "How did you know that?" I asked when I came back inside. Sienna looked up from her coffee, her expression blank. "Know what?" "The dog. You said..." "Did I?" She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I must have heard it. She had not. The frostbite healed mostly. She regained sensation in 2 of the 3 affected fingers. The third stayed numb, a permanent souvenir. She did not seem bothered by it. If anything, she seemed more present in her body than she ever had before, moving with a strange, deliberate grace that made me think of dancers or people relearning how to walk after an injury. It was the language that finally broke me. I came home early from work one afternoon and heard her voice from the bedroom. She was speaking in low, fluid sentences, the rhythm almost musical. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, thinking she was on the phone. Then I realized she was talking to herself, or at least I thought she was. The words were not English. I stood there, frozen, listening to her speak in a language I had never heard before. It had the cadence of Russian, maybe, or something Slavic, but softer, more rounded at the edges. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes half closed like she was reciting from memory. When she finally noticed me, she stopped mid-sentence and blinked. "Oh," she said. "You're home early." "What was that?" I asked. My voice came out too high, too tight. "What were you saying?" "I do not know what you mean." "Sienna, you were speaking something. Another language. What was it?" She frowned, genuinely puzzled. "I was not speaking anything. I was just sitting here. I heard you." Her frown deepened. Then slowly she shook her head. "You must have heard the TV, or maybe the neighbors." The TV was off. The neighbors were at work. I knew what I had heard. "Sienna," I said carefully, "have you learned a new language recently?" She laughed, a short surprise sound. "When would I have done that? I barely passed Spanish in high school." I wanted to push, to demand an explanation, but the look on her face stopped me. She seemed genuinely confused, almost concerned for me, like I was the one acting strange. That night, I stayed awake long after she fell asleep. I watched her in the dim light from the street, the rise and fall of her breathing, the way her hands twitched occasionally, like she was reaching for something in a dream. At one point, her lips moved. I leaned closer, straining to hear. She was whispering in that same language. Over the following weeks, I started recording her. Small clips on my phone when she thought I was not paying attention. She spoke in her sleep now, full sentences in that liquid, unknown tongue. During the day, she would pause mid-conversation, her eyes going distant, and murmur something under her breath before snapping back to herself. When I played the recordings for a linguist friend, he listened twice and shook his head. "It sounds like something old," he said. "Pre-Slavic, maybe." or constructed. Where did you get this? My wife, I said. He looked at me like I had told a bad joke. Your wife does not speak this. Nobody speaks this. It is not a living language. She never learned it, I said. Not before Aspen. His expression shifted. Before what happened in Aspen. I told him about the frostbite, the whiteout, the hollow in the woods. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. There are stories, he said finally, old ones, about people who get lost in storms and come back, changed, like something traded places with them while they were out there, or something got in. That is folklore, I said. So is speaking a dead language without learning it. I left his office with a headache and no answers. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in March. I woke to find Sienna standing at the window again, but this time she was crying. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks, catching the early light. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched like I had burned her. Sienna? She turned, and for a second, I did not recognize her. Her eyes were too wide, too bright. Her expression was raw in a way I had never seen. He taught me, she said. Who? While I was sleeping, in the snow. He taught me his name, his language. He said I could stay if I wanted, that it was warm there, under the ice. Her voice broke. I almost stayed, Finn. I almost did not come back. My blood went cold. Who are you talking about? I do not know, she whispered. But he is still here, in my head. He talks to me when you are not around. He tells me things, about you, about this place. He says this world is too loud, that I should come back to the quiet. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the woman I married flickering behind whatever else had taken up residence in her eyes. I do not know how much longer I can keep him out, she said. I do not sleep much anymore. I watch her, I listen. Sometimes late at night I hear her speaking that language in the dark, and I wonder if she is talking to me or to something else. Something that found her in the snow and decided it wanted to stay. The doctor said she was lucky. I'm not so sure. Miller Road always tried too hard at Christmas. Some streets did tasteful white icicles or a wreath on every door. Miller went for full spectacle. Synchronized light shows, inflatable snowmen taller than the houses, music blasting from hidden speakers, so jingle bells followed you from one end to the other whether you wanted it or not. As a paramedic, I had been down that street more times than I could count for slips on icy driveways, heart attacks after over-eager shoveling, and one memorable case of a kid swallowing a plastic ornament hook. I thought I knew every inch of it. I was wrong. It was a week before Christmas, the kind of bitter cold that made the inside of the ambulance feel like a walk-in freezer no matter how high we cranked the heat. My partner DeAndre was driving. Humming along off-key to the holiday station the dispatcher insisted on putting over the radio every year. We had just cleared from a call, elderly woman with shortness of breath, stable transport, when I saw the house at the corner of Miller and 5th. Number 47 had never decorated before. For as long as I had been working this district, it was the dark spot in an otherwise blinding line of festivity. The curtains were always closed. The driveway was always empty. I had never seen anyone go in or out. The neighborhood gossip said it was a rental owned by some out-of-state company. A ghost house, not anymore. Hold up, I said, leaning forward. What? DeAndre muttered. You already see the next heart attack. Look at 47. He slowed as we rolled past. The house was lit up for the first time, but not like the others. No inflatables. No roofline display synced to a Bluetooth playlist. Just a string of red and white lights along the front, wrapped in a pattern that made my skin prickle. From the street, it looked random, but habit is a hard thing to turn off. Years of scanning monitors, EKG strips, and medication labels had wired my brain to see patterns in lines and pulses. These lights were not random. The reds were short, tight bursts. The whites came in longer stretches. 3 short reds, 3 long whites, 3 short reds again. "Tell me you see that," I said. "See what?" DeAndre asked. "Morse," I said. "SOS." He squinted. "Come on, it is just lights. Count them." He did. His hands flexed on the steering wheel as he tracked the pattern. 3 red, 3 white, 3 red. The classic distress signal, wrapped neatly around the front of a suburban rental. "You think that is on purpose?" he asked. I thought about ignoring it, about writing it off as coincidence. But there was something about the precision of it that would not let go. Someone had gone out of their way to wire those lights in that sequence. Someone in the one house on Miller Road nobody ever talked to. "Circle back," I said. "We are not on a call. We have a minute." He sighed, but turned the wheel, looping the ambulance around at the next intersection. As we pulled back up in front of 47, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that comes right before you knock on a stranger's door and hope whatever is on the other side is within your ability to fix. Up close, the house looked even more wrong. The curtains were drawn, but not evenly. They hung crooked in places, shadows moving faintly behind them. The porch light was off, but the glow from the Christmas strand threw harsh, jagged shadows across the front steps. There were no decorations in the yard, no doormat, no wreath, just those lights repeating their silent distress call into the night. "You want to call this in first?" DeAndre asked. "And say what?" I said. "Morse code Christmas emergency. We will be the joke of the station for a month." We both sat there for a few seconds, the heater wheezing, the radio playing some upbeat song about chestnuts roasting. My pulse thrummed in my ears. "Okay," I said finally. "Knock and wellness check. If it is nothing, it is nothing." We stepped out of the rig, our boots crunching on the salted sidewalk. The cold hit like a slap. As we walked up the path, I noticed something else off. The snow on either side of the concrete was disturbed, not by the usual boot prints, but by narrower marks, like something heavy and narrow had been dragged from the front door to the driveway over and over. The ambulance's headlights caught on faint scratches in the concrete along the edges, metal against stone. "Fun," DeAndre muttered. I rapped on the door, 3 solid knocks. For a moment, nothing. Then, faintly, footsteps inside. Not the heavy tread of the average suburban homeowner. Quicker, more than one set. The deadbolt slid back. The door opened a crack, held in place by a security chain. A man's face appeared in the gap. Mid-40s maybe. Clean-shaven. Dark hair going thin at the temples. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Evening," I said, forcing my voice into the calm professional register. "We were driving by and noticed your lights. Just wanted to make sure everything was all right in the home." His eyes flicked to my uniform, to the ambulance idling at the curb, to DeAndre standing a step behind me. "Everything is fine," he said, "just getting into the holiday spirit." Out of the corner of my eye, something moved behind him. A flicker of pale color, a hand maybe, retreating from the doorframe. I heard a muffled cough, then a stifled squeak like someone had been pinched. "Anybody else home?" I asked. He hesitated just a fraction too long. "My family," he said. "They are shy." The word family landed wrong. There was no sign of kids' toys in the yard, no extra cars in the driveway, no boots jumbled by the door behind him. Just a single pair of men's shoes and a rubber mat stained with something dark. A shape shifted left behind him. A face appeared in the narrow strip of hallway visible before being jerked back out of sight. In that split second, I saw wide eyes, hollows under cheekbones, hair that looked like it had not seen a brush in weeks. Not a child. A woman. Fear carved into the tight line of her mouth. Every training scenario I had ever done about domestic violence, trafficking, and coercive control flashed through my mind. The lights. The dragged marks in the snow. The woman's face. "Sir," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "we would feel more comfortable if we could speak to everyone in the home. just to make sure there is no medical need." He tried to shut the door, slowly, as if we would not notice. DeAndre stepped forward, one boot blocking the door from closing fully. "We can call law enforcement to assist if you prefer," he said. "They are closer than you think." A muscle ticked in the man's jaw. For a heartbeat, his friendly mask slipped. What stared back at us then was flat and cold, calculating. "There is no need for that," he said tightly. "You are wasting your time." Behind him, the woman's face appeared again, just her eyes this time, peeking from the shadow of a doorway. She looked past him straight at me. For a moment, everything else fell away. The cold, the lights, the man in the doorway. Her hands came up just within my line of sight. Her fingers moved in quick, jerky motions. Tap, 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 tap. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. My throat closed. She knew Morse, too. "Okay," I said carefully, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Then you will not mind if I step in for a second and check your wife's vitals. She looks a little pale." He turned, fast, but not fast enough. She flinched back like she had been struck, even before his hand twitched toward her. "She's fine," he snapped. "Mind your own." The rest of his sentence vanished under the wail of a siren. DeAndre had hit the emergency alert on his radio the second the woman started tapping. The code went out to dispatch as a general distress. The nearest patrol car responded almost immediately. Our ambulance lights might as well have been a flare. The cruiser swung around the corner, tires squealing on the icy road, lights painting the snow red and blue. The man's face shuddered. For a moment, I thought he might slam the door and throw the chain. Instead, he stepped back, forcing a tight smile. "Everything is fine," he said again, louder now, as if the repetition could make it true. "Officer, tell them to go. My family does not." The officer, Santos, a woman I had worked scenes with before, joined us on the porch, one hand resting on the butt of her holstered gun, the other on the door. "We got a distress code," she said. "And an anonymous tip about Christmas lights spelling a signal. Step aside, sir." He did not. Santos's expression did not change, but her voice did. "Step aside. Now." He hesitated just a fraction too long. That was all she needed. In one smooth motion, she popped the chain with a tool she carried for just such situations and pushed the door wider. The smell hit me first. Too many bodies in too small a space. Sweat. Bleach. That faint, sour tang of fear that clings to fabric and skin. The hallway was narrow, the walls bare, except for one framed picture of a generic winter scene. The woman we had seen in the doorway stood just beyond reach, her arms folded around herself. Behind her, further down the hall, were 2 more figures, both female, both thin to the point of translucence. They squinted in the sudden light. Santos's jaw tightened. "Ma'am," she said to the nearest woman, "are you here of your own free will?" The woman opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat worked. Her eyes flicked to the man, then back to us. Her hands twitched again. Tap, 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 tap. She did not need to speak. What followed was messy and loud. More units arrived. Radios crackled with codes. The man protested, shouted, tried to charm, tried to threaten. None of it mattered once the other rooms were opened. The small bedroom in the back with 3 mattresses on the floor and no windows. The padlocks on the outside of doors. The ledger on the kitchen table listing names and dates and dollar amounts. Later, we would learn that the women were not related. They had been brought from different states, promised jobs, then disappeared into the quiet black hole of 47 Miller Road. The man had been rotating them regularly, moving them through holiday rentals, never staying long enough in one place to draw attention, until someone had the idea to use the only thing she had access to, the Christmas lights. On the ride back to the station, my hands would not stop shaking. "You okay?" DeAndre asked finally. I stared out the window at the blur of decorated houses. "She knew," I said. "Whoever put up those lights, she knew someone might notice." "Not just someone," he said. "Someone like you. You are the only freak I know who who still remembers Morse from high school. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had not hurt. She got lucky then. He shook his head. Lucky is not the word I would use, but she is alive because you looked twice. The news made it a story for a week. Secret signal saves captives. Experts talked about signs of trafficking, about how many cases go unnoticed in plain sight. Then the cameras moved on. Another tragedy, another miracle, another thing for people to shake their heads about before going back to their own decorated streets. I still drive down Miller Road sometimes, on my way back from calls. Number 47 is dark again. The rental company sold it. The new owners have toddlers and inflatable snowmen and a wreath with a giant bow. Their lights are cheerful and chaotic, no pattern at all. Part of me is grateful they do not spell anything. Another part of me watches anyway, counting without meaning to. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. We are trained to look for certain signs in this job. Labored breathing, unequal pupils, the smell of almonds on the breath. Nobody told me to add Christmas lights to that list. Now I do. Every winter, every street, every house that tries too hard. 'Cause somewhere out there, someone else might be tapping a code with whatever is available. And all it takes is one person who is willing to see it for what it is instead of what makes them comfortable. This year, someone hung a string of plain white lights along the railing at the base where we park the rigs. They blink in a random pattern, uneven and messy. I checked them anyway.